Business Center. Analyst's office. Namjoon, in the work chat. Urgent project. Taeyoung, I need your help for teamwork. Deadlines are critical. I'll make it up to you with a bonus. Taeyoung, smirking. Alright, what is it this time? He got up from his desk, glancing at Jimin and Hoseok. Jimin, you're always so lucky. An urgent project and a bonus. I spent an hour today just trying to convince Yoongi to look at my request. Hoseok, shrugging. That's Yoongi for you. Did you honestly expect him to say good morning too? Jimin, are you kidding? I went up to him, and all I got was, what do you want? That's it. He didn't even look up. Taeyoung patted Jimin on the head sympathetically. Hoseok, laughing. And now Jungkook's sitting next to him. Have you seen them together? I'm starting to wonder if they even talk to each other. Taeyoung, leaning against Hoseok's desk. Jungkook? Is that the new handsome guy with the piercings we saw in the cafeteria recently? Hoseok. Yeah. So distant. Didn't even bother to look our way when we walked by. Jimin. 2 icebergs in a single square meter. You get it, Taeyoung. If your partner's one of them, good luck. Taeyoung, grinning. I'll manage. Guys like that are nothing new to me. In high spirits, he winked at his colleagues and headed toward the boss's office. Namjoon's office. When the door opened, instead of the expected Namjoon, Taeyoung saw Jungkook. He was standing by the window with his arms crossed. Jungkook glanced briefly at Taeyoung but immediately turned back, as if his presence was of no significance. Taeyoung, thinking, is this your thing, or do you greet everyone like this? Being ignored ignited a spark of challenge in Taeyoung. He quickly approached Jungkook, stopping just a step away. Jungkook took a step back, visibly uncomfortable. Taeyoung moved even closer, now face to face. Jungkook found himself practically backed against the wall, and Taeyoung stood so near that Jungkook could clearly see the color of his eyes. Taeyoung, smirking. What, didn't anyone teach you how to say hello? Jungkook felt his breath hitch in surprise. In a sudden motion, Jungkook stretched out his arms, trying to push Taeyoung away, but he pushed too hard. Taeyoung, with a dull thud. Ouch! Taeyoung toppled over a chair, the crash making Jungkook freeze in place. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, laughter rang out. Bright, genuine, and completely disarming. Taeyoung threw his laughter. Wow, that's quite a welcome! I just wanted to say hi, and you're knocking me over. Jungkook stood motionless for a few seconds, as if paralyzed. Jungkook, quietly, nervously. I didn't mean to. Are you okay? He quickly bent down to help, but Taeyoung, grabbing his hand, frowned. Taeyoung, my leg. I think I can't stand. Jungkook paled. Injuring a colleague was definitely not part of his plans. Jungkook, frantically. I'll call an ambulance. Or what should I do? At that moment, the door opened, and Namjoon entered. Namjoon, pausing. What's all this noise? And what's going on here? His gaze shifted from Taeyoung, sitting on the floor, to Jungkook, who looked utterly bewildered. Taeyoung, smiling through the pain. Oh, just a creative approach to introductions. Jungkook, guiltily. I didn't mean to. It was an accident. Namjoon frowned as he noticed Taeyoung struggling to put weight on his right leg. Namjoon, covering his face with a hand. I see. Looks like our urgent project is starting with a trip to the hospital. Emergency room, trauma department. The doctor quickly reviewed the test results, removed his glasses, and said, Doctor, it's just a sprain. Nothing serious, but you'll need to wear this cast for a week. Avoid putting weight on the leg and get plenty of rest. Ideally, stay at home. He gave a curt nod and left, leaving the three of them alone in the room. Taeyoung, looking at Namjoon. What about the project? It's urgent. Namjoon rubbed his temples wearily. Namjoon, you'll work from home. You'll manage. Taeyoung, gesturing at his leg, groaning slightly. But how am I supposed to be home alone? I'll need help, with cooking or, other stuff. Taeyoung's eyes drifted to Jungkook. Jungkook, in shock. What? Namjoon, noticing Jungkook's reaction, quickly got to his feet, skillfully pretending to have urgent matters to attend to. Namjoon. It's settled. Jungkook, you'll go to his place and work with him. I'll go take care of the hospital bill. Good luck. He practically fled the room, leaving Taeyoung and Jungkook alone. Taeyoung grinning happily. So you'll come over. And bring lunch with you on the way. Perfect. Jungkook pressed his lips together, staying silent. Taeyoung tilting his head. Oh, and maybe help me take a shower? Just once or twice. Jungkook sharply. If you keep this up, I'll injure your other leg. Then you can sue me. Taeyoung, giving in with a smirk. All right. Just help me up. Jungkook sighed, picked up one of the crutches, and handed it to Taeyoung. But instead of using it, Taeyoung suddenly wrapped an arm around Jungkook's neck, leaning his full weight on him. Jungkook, rolling his eyes. You're kidding, right? Taeyoung grinning. Hey, you said you'd help. Suppressing his irritation, Jungkook supported him with one arm, holding the crutch in the other. Jungkook, through gritted teeth. You are the toughest challenge of my life. Taeyoung cheerfully. But you'll never forget me. They slowly made their way to the exit under the curious gazes of other visitors. Hospital parking lot. Jungkook carefully helped Taeyoung into the car, closing the door behind him. Walking around the vehicle, he got into the driver's seat and, before starting the engine, turned to his passenger. Jungkook. Put your home address into the GPS. Taeyoung cheerfully. Of course. Jungkook pulled out of the parking lot, sneaking glances at Taeyoung, who was tapping his fingers on the dashboard in time with the upbeat music, humming along. Jungkook, thinking how can he be so carefree? He recalled their first meeting in the cafeteria. Taeyoung had been hanging off Hoseok's back, resting his chin on Hoseok's shoulder, giving commands. Taeyoung. More fries. No, the other ones. Now salad. And the second time, in the lobby, when Jimin was struggling to carry Taeyoung on his back, their laughter echoing through the entire office. Taeyoung was always touching someone, as if he couldn't exist without physical contact. And somehow, everyone seemed to let it slide. Jungkook, thinking and today he touched me more than anyone has in the past year. He sneaked another glance at Taeyoung. The latter was singing with his eyes closed, entirely absorbed in the music. Jungkook, thinking, sighing heavily, quit? No. I've only been here a month. That'd ruin my reputation. He gripped the steering wheel more tightly, focusing on the road. But the persistent feeling that the coming days would test every ounce of his patience refused to leave him. Taeyoung's home parking garage. Jungkook turned off the engine and looked at Taeyoung, who seemed far too relaxed, like this was the start of a vacation rather than the end of a long day. Jungkook got out, walked around, and extended a hand to help him out. Jungkook, impatiently. Come on, just don't lean on me this time. But as soon as Taeyoung stood up, he immediately wrapped an arm around Jungkook's neck, leaning on him once more. Jungkook, with a heavy sigh, tilting his head back. Why do crutches even exist if you're not going to use them? Taeyoung smiling. Crutches are boring. You're dependable. Supporting him by the waist, Jungkook begrudgingly helped him to the elevator. Inside, Taeyoung radiated his usual cheerfulness, while Jungkook stood with a tense expression, barely containing his frustration. Jungkook, thinking it's just a week. I can do this. Probably. They reached the correct floor. Taeyoung opened the door to his apartment, and, stepping inside, turned to look at Jungkook. Jungkook paused at the threshold, hesitated briefly, and then stepped inside, placing the crutches by the entrance. Jungkook. There. Everything's set. Now maybe you could start actually using them? Taeyoung smiling. First, help me get to the bedroom. I need to change. Jungkook, rolling his eyes. Anything else? Supporting him again, Jungkook led Taeyoung down the hallway to the bedroom. Taeyoung stopped in front of the wardrobe. Taeyoung. Thanks. I'll take it from here. Jungkook turned to leave but froze when he saw Taeyoung pulling his shirt off over his head without unbuttoning it. Taeyoung calmly, "What? You don't expect me to sleep in this, do you?" Jungkook didn't reply. His face flushed bright red, and he bolted from the bedroom, slamming the door behind him. Laughter echoed from inside the room. Taeyoung shouting, "Thanks for the help. You're so caring." Jungkook closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and silently left, shutting the apartment door behind him. The next day. Office. Jungkook entered the office, his footsteps muffled against the backdrop of the morning chatter among colleagues. Without acknowledging anyone, he headed straight for Taeyoung's desk. Jimin and Hoseok, seated at adjacent desks, immediately noticed his arrival. Jimin, whispering with a hint of intrigue, "Is that him?" Hoseok nodding, "Yup. The one and only." Jungkook ignored their murmuring as he opened a bag and began packing up Taeyoung's work essentials: a laptop, a charger, and a couple of folders. Hoseok, "Hey, how's Taeyoung?" Without turning around, Jungkook responded curtly, "Jungkook, you've got hands. Call and ask him yourself." Jimin, indignantly, "Are you serious? You're the one who injured him, and now you can't even give a proper answer?" Jungkook hesitated for a moment, let out a heavy sigh, and finally looked up at them. Jungkook dryly, "He'll be fine." He zipped up the bag, slung it over his shoulder, and added before leaving, "Jungkook, the only victim in this situation is me." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked out of the office, leaving Jimin and Hoseok staring after him in astonishment. Before heading to Taeyoung's place, Jungkook decided to stop by the cafe near the office. He bought several breakfast and lunch sets, reasoning that it would help avoid unnecessary breaks during work. Looking at the bags of food, he smirked, realizing he had given in to Taeyoung's subtle manipulations as he made his way to the apartment. When Taeyoung opened the door, leaning on one crutch, he immediately abandoned it upon seeing Jungkook, throwing his arm around his guest's shoulder. Jungkook, in shock, "Seriously? Again?" Taeyoung, cheerfully, with a grin, "It's faster this way." Jungkook let out a heavy sigh, rolled his eyes, but still helped him into the living room. They sat at the table, setting up their laptops across from each other. Without a word, Jungkook unpacked the breakfast bags and laid them out in front of Taeyoung. Taeyoung, beaming, "You're the most thoughtful person I know." "Thanks." Jungkook, flatly, "Don't flatter yourself. This is guilt, not care." Taeyoung chuckled but said nothing as he unwrapped the food. A few minutes later, an email from Namjoon arrived with additional data. Jungkook glanced at Taeyoung and froze. Taeyoung had transformed. The easy smile was gone, replaced by a focused intensity. His eyes sparkled with sharp concentration as he carefully reviewed the spreadsheets, fingers typing rapidly, eyes darting across the screen. Taeyoung thoughtfully, "This much in a week? That's nearly impossible." He licked his lips absent-mindedly, not taking his eyes off the screen. His face was a picture of focus, and his gaze burned with determination. Leaning back in his chair, Jungkook couldn't help but notice how different and strikingly handsome Taeyoung looked when he was serious. Jungkook, thinking he's completely different when he works. Incredible. They split the data between them and dove into the analysis, each immersed in their tasks. By the end of the day, Taeyoung closed his laptop with a sigh and looked at Jungkook tiredly. Taeyoung playfully, "Help me take a shower." Jungkook coldly, "You'll manage." Taeyoung, "It's slippery in there, Tiles." Jungkook, with a faint smirk, "Crawl on all fours." Taeyoung pouted, clearly offended, but said nothing in return. Jungkook, "All right, see you tomorrow." He got up, gathered his belongings, and left, leaving Taeyoung alone in the apartment. The next morning. As usual, Jungkook arrived at Taeyoung's apartment. He quickly entered the code Taeyoung had given him the day before and stepped inside. Taeyoung, with damp hair, was already seated at his laptop. He stood briefly, balancing on one crutch, as Jungkook entered. Jungkook, raising an eyebrow, Looks like you managed to take a shower after all. Taeyoung smiling. Yup. Amazing how I survived without your help. Jungkook just shook his head and walked to his workstation. Taeyoung, with a touch of care. By the way, I ordered sushi for lunch. Do you eat seafood or should I get something else? Jungkook curtly. I eat it. They dove into work, engrossed in spreadsheets and graphs. Occasionally, Taeyoung would walk over, resting a hand on Jungkook's shoulder to show him which data to process. Taeyoung. Here, this one's for your analysis. Jungkook nodded silently, transferring the data into his section. As lunchtime approached, an unexpected knock at the door broke the rhythm. Jungkook, slightly surprised, stood to open it. Standing outside were Hoseok and Jimin, carrying a bag of expensive grapes and some drinks. Hoseok, grinning widely. Hey! We came to check on our injured buddy. Jimin, noticing Jungkook. Oh, it's you. Well, hello? Jungkook gave them a slight nod, but it didn't stop them. They promptly nudged him aside and strode in confidently. In the living room, they greeted Taeyoung enthusiastically, wrapping him in friendly hugs while casting occasional side glances at Jungkook. Jimin. Look at him. How could he possibly hurt you? Hoseok, in a mock-serious tone. Does he even know how to handle people? Jungkook stood off to the side, arms crossed, sighing audibly as he sat back at his workstation. Taeyoung smiling. Jungkook, try the grapes. They're really good. Jungkook shortly. Don't want any. He resumed working, ignoring the lively banter between Hoseok and Jimin. Meanwhile, Taeyoung opened one of the drinks and turned to Jungkook. Taeyoung softly. Can you grab some glasses, please? Jungkook rolled his eyes but got up. A moment later, he returned with 3 glasses, setting them on the table. Jimin, exchanging a look with Hoseok. Is he your servant now? Taeyoung, grinning smugly. How else would it work? Hoseok and Jimin exchanged glances, their conversation continuing in a joking tone. After a few more minutes, they checked the time. Hoseok. All right, we have to get back. Lunch break's over. Jungkook stood to see them out. At the door, Jimin paused for a moment. Jimin. Jungkook, don't mistreat our Taeyoung, okay? Hoseok with a smirk. Yeah, just hang in there. The cast will be off soon, and then Dabi will be free. They burst into laughter, clearly implying Jungkook was Dabi. Jungkook's expression remained stony as he shut the door in their faces without a word. Returning to his laptop, he allowed himself a faint smirk, replaying the joke in his head. Jungkook, muttering softly. Dabi. He shook his head and dove back into work, focusing intently. The next 2 days followed a steady rhythm. They worked from morning until late at night, alternating turns ordering food. Jungkook left only in the deep hours of the night, returning early the next day to pick up where they had left off. Day 4. Evening. Taeyoung leaned back in his chair, rubbing his neck tiredly. His gaze shifted to the clock and then to the window. Taeyoung, regretfully. You know, I'd give anything right now for a cup of my favorite tea from the cafe near the office. But they don't do delivery. He glanced at the clock again and sighed. Taeyoung. Though, they're probably closed by now. Jungkook looked up from his screen, paused for a moment, and then said, Jungkook. We could take a break. I can make some hot chocolate. They say it's good for brain function. Taeyoung perking up. Are you serious? You can make hot chocolate? At Taeyoung's reaction, Jungkook's lips twitched slightly into the faintest hint of a smile. Taeyoung with admiration. Wow. I didn't know you could smile. It looks really good on you. Jungkook rolled his eyes slightly but extended a hand to help Taeyoung up. Jungkook. Come on. But don't lean on me too much. Taeyoung grinning. I promise to be as light as a feather. Leaning on Jungkook's arm, they slowly made their way to the kitchen. Taeyoung sat down at the table, propping his chin on his hand, watching as Jungkook worked. The quiet sound of frothed milk and the rich aroma of chocolate filled the room. For some reason, the scene brought a sense of simple joy to Taeyoung. When a steaming cup of hot chocolate was placed in front of him, Taeyoung took his first sip and paused in surprise. Taeyoung, I didn't expect someone so cold to make something so amazingly warm and delicious. Jungkook, with a faint smile. Life's full of surprises. Taeyoung, curious. What other surprises do you have in store? For the first time, Jungkook's smile widened. He lightly touched Taeyoung's shoulder. Jungkook, for now, expect that the break is over. Time to get back to work. Taeyoung nodding. All right, but this was the best break I've had in days. They returned to their desks, diving back into work, but the cozy moment lingered in the air, adding a touch of warmth to the evening. Several hours later, as they assessed the remaining workload, both Taeyoung and Jungkook came to the same conclusion. Taeyoung, sighing heavily. We're not going to finish by tomorrow evening. Jungkook. Absolutely not. Taeyoung leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes briefly, but then straightened up, slapping the table with sudden determination. Taeyoung. Then here's the plan, forget about sleep tonight. We'll power through without stopping. Namjoon will owe us big time. Jungkook, eyeing him skeptically, then nodding. If we survive this night, he won't just owe us. He'll owe us a lot. And so began their sleepless night. They downed coffee, chased it with water to stay hydrated, and worked relentlessly without breaks. Morning turned into afternoon, but their pace and focus remained sharp. By evening, as they neared the finish line, Taeyoung leaned his head on Jungkook's shoulder, lazily glancing at his section of the data. Taeyoung sleepily. You're doing great. Jungkook froze for a moment, aware of the warmth and the faint scent of Taeyoung's hair tickling his cheek. He didn't pull away. He couldn't even remember when he had last rolled his eyes at Taeyoung's constant touches. Jungkook, I think he's tamed me. The thought made his cheeks flush slightly, but he maintained his usual stoic demeanor. Taeyoung smugly. I'm great too. And you know what? We've got an hour left, and we're done. They sent the final files to Namjoon's email and sighed with relief. Jungkook, collapsing onto the couch. Never again. No more of Namjoon's crazy projects. Taeyoung laughing. You're absolutely right. A knock at the door interrupted their moment. Jungkook reluctantly got up to answer it. At the door stood a delivery driver holding an enormous fruit basket and several bottles of premium champagne, wine, and other drinks. Delivery driver, holding out the basket. Delivery. Taeyoung peeked out from the living room, looking puzzled. Taeyoung. And what's this supposed to be? Jungkook spotted a card attached to the fruit basket. The card read, a moral compensation for the finest work from the finest specialists. Namjoon. They exchanged glances, still processing the surprise. Jungkook shaking his head. Well, this is a twist. Did he somehow know we'd managed to finish on time? Taeyoung laughing. Looks like he actually knows how to appreciate people. So, shall we celebrate? They both burst out laughing, feeling a wave of satisfaction from completing the project and the unexpected reward from their boss. Jungkook, giving in to the mood, agreed to celebrate the completion of the project. Jungkook. Alright, we earned this. He helped Taeyoung settle onto the couch in the living room, then joined him, opening a bottle of champagne. While the sparkling wine fizzed into the glasses, Taeyoung arranged some fruit on plates. Taeyoung. I have some cheese too. It'll go perfectly with this. Jungkook. Stay put. I'll get it. Taeyoung watched in surprise as Jungkook headed to the kitchen, quickly found what he needed, and returned with neatly sliced cheese. A warm feeling spread through Taeyoung's chest. Over the past few days, Jungkook seemed to have opened up, doing small, thoughtful things that didn't go unnoticed. Taeyoung realized he genuinely liked this side of Jungkook a lot. After a couple of toasts, Taeyoung suddenly suggested, Taeyoung, how about we play some video games? And then you stay over. We've been up all night, and after champagne. It's safer not to risk it. Jungkook, tired but smiling faintly. Fine. Your couch seems comfortable enough for sleeping. They turned on the console and quickly discovered they both loved the same game. The tension of the past few days slowly started to melt away. The champagne turned out to be as exquisite as it was expensive, and paired with the game, it helped them unwind. After a few rounds and feeling more at ease, Taeyoung reached into the basket and pulled out another bottle. Taeyoung, raising his eyebrows playfully. We've got white wine too. Really fancy stuff. They say you can mix it with champagne. Jungkook stood and confidently opened the bottle. But as he stepped back, he accidentally spilled half of it onto the couch. For a moment, there was silence. Jungkook, looking at Taeyoung in shock. Taeyoung laughing. You just spilled $150. Jungkook, pretending to be serious. Well, now your couch is worth more. They couldn't hold it in and burst out laughing. The laughter continued as they sipped the remaining wine, gradually feeling exhaustion catch up with them. When it was finally time to sleep, they looked at the wet couch. Taeyoung. Well, since the couch is soaked, that leaves the bed. It's big enough for two. He fully expected Jungkook to come up with a way to refuse, but to his surprise, Jungkook simply nodded, agreeing without any jokes. Jungkook. Fine. I'm too tired to argue. Taeyoung was taken aback but said nothing. Jungkook, without hesitation, helped him to the bed, supporting him by the elbow. They both collapsed onto the soft mattress, feeling like this long day had finally, mercifully, come to an end. For a while, they simply lay there, silently looking at each other. Neither turned away, nor did their gazes waver. At this moment, without his usual cold demeanor, Jungkook looked different. His gaze was warm, and a faint, barely there smile graced his lips. Perhaps it was the alcohol in their veins, or perhaps exhaustion, but Taeyoung suddenly felt an irresistible urge to touch the piercing on Jungkook's lips. He hesitantly reached out his hand but stopped just short of Jungkook's face, waiting for some kind of reaction, perhaps resistance. However, Jungkook continued to look at him with the same calm, even tender expression. Taeyoung gently touched his face, slowly running his finger from Jungkook's temple to his cheekbone. His fingers lingered at Jungkook's chin before moving slightly upward. His gaze fell on Jungkook's lips, as if seeing their perfectly defined lines for the first time. He softly traced the piercing with his fingers, studying it. Jungkook, maintaining eye contact, leaned forward slightly and, almost unexpectedly, brushed his lips against Taeyoung's fingers, leaving a gentle kiss. A fire ignited within Taeyoung. Without fully realizing what he was doing, he slowly leaned in and softly pressed his lips to Jungkook's. At first, their kiss was barely noticeable, almost weightless, as if both were trying to feel what it would be like. But then it grew more insistent, though still soft and gentle. Jungkook was incredibly responsive. His sensitivity and gentle movements in return made Taeyoung feel lightheaded. At one point, Jungkook took the lead. He shifted their positions, gently rolling Taeyoung onto his back as he moved on top, his hands steadying Taeyoung by the waist. Their kisses slowed, deepened, as they sank into the moment, savoring every movement and sensation. It felt as if the rest of the world had paused, leaving only the two of them. When they finally leaned back, their breathing began to steady, though the warmth of the kiss lingered on their lips. Their hands lightly touched before their fingers intertwined, firm yet tender. Neither spoke a word, it wasn't necessary. Soft smiles played on their lips, silently reflecting the feelings they shared in that moment. Holding each other's hands, they slowly drifted off to sleep, filled with quiet joy and warmth. Morning. Jungkook woke up to the sensation of someone holding him. He cracked his eyes open and froze, realizing it was Taeyoung. The warmth of Taeyoung's embrace felt so natural that Jungkook allowed himself a moment to simply lie there, enjoying it. Jungkook, thinking, how did this happen? How did we get to the point where I feel so at ease with him? Careful not to wake him, Jungkook gently untangled himself from Taeyoung's arms. Watching Taeyoung sleep peacefully, he felt a wave of warmth spread through him. Jungkook, thinking, I want his morning to be perfect. The idea came to him instantly. Taeyoung's favorite fruit tea and croissants, something that would bring out his genuine, happy smile. Jungkook quickly dressed and headed to the cafe near the office. As he drove, he couldn't help but smile at the thought of Taeyoung's delight. When he returned and opened the door, instead of the expected silence, he heard voices coming from the bedroom. "Jin, get up, we're already late." Taeyoung laughing. "Just give me another minute. I drank too much last night." Jungkook froze in the doorway of the bedroom. His gaze settled on the scene before him, Jin leaning low over Taeyoung, trying to help him up. They were both laughing, as if the moment belonged to them alone. Jealousy ignited within Jungkook, searing through him like fire. The realization that Taeyoung was always so tactile with everyone, that anyone could have been in Jungkook's place, shattered him inside. For Taeyoung, it was just his nature. But Jungkook was the fool who believed he meant something more to him. Jin noticed him and straightened, adjusting his suit with a polite smile. "Jin. Oh, Jungkook. Hi. Namjoon asked me to pick up Taeyoung and take him to the hospital to get his cast removed." But Jungkook wasn't listening anymore. Everything inside him had frozen. His indifferent mask slid back into place. Taeyoung noticed the change immediately. Jungkook's gaze, once warm and open, had turned cold and distant. It felt so foreign compared to the Jungkook from yesterday, the one with a shy smile, caring and unexpectedly gentle. Jungkook, with artificial disdain. "Finally! I won't have to put up with his constant touching anymore." Jungkook's words echoed in Taeyoung's chest, leaving a searing emptiness behind. Taeyoung dropped his gaze, unable to meet his eyes. His fingers clenched the edge of the bedsheet, and his chest felt unbearably heavy, as if the weight of his emotions was suffocating him. He sat silently, listening as Jungkook's footsteps receded and the door slammed shut, shattering the fragile quiet. Jin watched him closely. Jin, curiously. "Did something happen between you two?" Taeyoung, in a whisper. "I think I crossed boundaries I shouldn't have." Taeyoung was almost certain Jungkook was angry about the kiss. Sobered up, he must have realized he regretted everything that had happened. As Jungkook descended the stairs, a hollow emptiness expanded in his chest. Jungkook, thinking, why does this hurt so much? I knew this was just his habit. He threw the bag with Taeyoung's breakfast into a trash can without even looking at it. Jungkook, thinking I did the right thing. This needed to end. It's better this way. But the words brought neither relief nor peace. Jungkook got into his car and started driving home. But soon the road blurred before his eyes. He pulled over to the side of the road and turned off the engine. Drops of water fell onto the steering wheel. Jungkook stared at them in surprise, then slowly ran his fingers over his face. His cheeks were wet. He was crying. Tears rolled down his face, and he hadn't even realized it. Jungkook, whispering in surprise. "Tears? When was the last time I cried?" The tears fell uncontrollably as he sat motionless, feeling the painful heaviness in his chest grow stronger with every passing moment. Monday. Business Center. Taeyoung stood outside the door to the office where Jungkook and Yoongi worked, nervously clutching a bag containing Jungkook's hoodie, the one he'd forgotten at Taeyoung's place. It seemed like a good opportunity, if not to repair things entirely, then at least to apologize. Taeyoung wasn't entirely sure what he'd done wrong, but he felt he had to try. Swallowing the lump in his throat, he cautiously opened the door. As expected, no one paid him any attention. Jungkook was completely absorbed in his work, and Yoongi didn't even seem to notice his arrival. Taeyoung quietly approached Jungkook's desk. Taeyoung, placing the bag down softly. "Hi! You left this at my place." Jungkook didn't lift his eyes from the screen. He gave a slight nod, as if that was acknowledgement enough. Taeyoung pressed his lips together, feeling a painful tightness in his chest. He lingered for a moment, hoping for some further response from Jungkook, but none came. It was clear. Everything was broken. Taeyoung slowly turned and walked out, not daring to look back. A few minutes later, Yoongi got up to grab coffee, leaving Jungkook alone. When the room fell into silence, Jungkook's eyes drifted to the bag. Almost involuntarily, his hands reached for it. He carefully pulled out the hoodie and, before he could stop himself, pressed it to his face. The soft fabric smelled of Taeyoung, his cologne, his home, his warmth. Jungkook closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, the scent instantly pulling him back to moments when everything had felt so easy. But as he lowered the hoodie, he froze. Yoongi had returned and was sitting silently at his desk, acting as if he'd seen nothing. Jungkook's face flushed crimson, a hot wave of embarrassment washing over him. He hastily stuffed the hoodie back into the bag and returned to his work, trying to push thoughts of Taeyoung from his mind. Yoongi continued typing, his expression neutral, but the faintest hint of a smirk played at the corner of his lips. A few days later. Business center. Lunch break. Taeyoung rested his head lazily on Hoseok's shoulder, watching as Hoseok loaded food onto a tray for him. Hoseok, smiling. So, back to the topic of the New Year's party. Are you going? Namjoon said attendance is mandatory. Taeyoung indifferently. Probably. Honestly, though, I'd rather stay home. Jimin, standing nearby, nodded. Jimin. Yeah, I get that. But skipping isn't an option. Even Yoongi said he'd come, and he hates these events. Taeyoung smirking. That's only because Namjoon threatened him. The conversation continued as Hoseok patiently followed Taeyoung's commands. Taeyoung. Rice. Salad. And another piece of chicken. Jimin watched with a hint of concern. Over the past few days, he had noticed a significant change in Taeyoung. His usual contagious energy was gone. Now, he seemed distracted, lost in thought, and often distant. He and Hoseok had been trying to lift Taeyoung's spirits, but it felt almost impossible. Suddenly, Jungkook walked past them. His strides were quick, his gaze cold and focused. But as he passed Hoseok, he shot him a deadly glare. Hoseok shivered involuntarily, feeling a chill run down his spine. Hoseok, whispering with a nervous chuckle. Taeyoung, your Jungkook just looked at me like he wanted to kill me. Maybe you should start walking on your own instead of leaning on me? Taeyoung smirked faintly, but his voice was devoid of emotion. Taeyoung, if he wants to kill anyone, it'll definitely be me, not you. Hoseok shook his head, staring at Taeyoung with obvious disbelief. Hoseok firmly. That was jealousy. Did you not see it? Taeyoung said nothing, letting out a quiet sigh and turning away. He was too convinced that Jungkook hated him. Jimin watched Jungkook disappear around the corner. Everything inside him screamed that whatever was happening between Taeyoung and Jungkook was far from over. The next week. New Year's party. Namjoon had rented an entire hall for 50 people, complete with karaoke and a cozy ambience. Taeyoung arrived a little later than the others. As soon as he entered, Hoseok and Jimin pulled him over and seated him between them. Some colleagues were already belting out karaoke, filling the hall with loud, if not always melodic, singing. Nearby, Jungkook and Yoongi sat looking utterly indifferent to the festivities. Yoongi, in particular, seemed to be enduring the noise as if it were a personal trial. When Namjoon noticed Taeyoung, he turned off the music and tapped his glass to get everyone's attention. The chatter in the hall quieted, and he began his speech. Namjoon. Friends, I want to thank you all for an incredible year. We've accomplished so much thanks to your hard work. But I especially want to acknowledge two people without whom this success wouldn't have been possible. He gestured for Taeyoung and Jungkook to join him at the front. Jungkook, sitting closer, stood up first and approached Namjoon. Taeyoung followed slowly, stopping at a distance that felt just slightly too far to be comfortable. Pressing his lips together, he forced a faint, strained smile. Namjoon. These two have done extraordinary work, and thanks to them, we've secured a massive contract for next year. The room burst into applause, with colleagues raising their glasses in celebration. Jungkook and Taeyoung carefully avoided looking at each other. But Namjoon wasn't done yet. Grabbing them both by the hands, he led them to his table and seated them side by side across from him. Namjoon, smiling. Now, let's celebrate properly. He poured champagne into their glasses. Sitting next to each other, Jungkook and Taehyung tried to maintain some distance, but the tension between them was palpable. Suddenly, Hoseok rushed over and leaned down to whisper to them. Hoseok urgently. Jimin and Yoongi are fighting in the VIP room. You need to help, quick! Jungkook shot a glance around the hall, noticing Yoongi was indeed nowhere to be seen. Jungkook, frowning, quietly. He really is gone. Taehyung sighed in concern and stood with him. They hurried to the VIP room, but when they entered, they found it completely dark. Before they could react, the doors shut firmly behind them, and the lights flickered on, flooding the room with bright illumination. Taehyung glanced around but saw no one else in the room. Taehyung, irritated. This isn't funny. Open the door! Suddenly, Jimin's voice called from the other side. Jimin, don't worry, we're fine. Jungkook and Taehyung exchanged confused looks, only to hear Yoongi's calm voice next. Yoongi, I'll let you out when you finally talk to each other. Sad Jungkook is distracting me at work. Taehyung in shock. My friends are traitors. Taehyung glanced at Jungkook, who stood with his arms crossed, dramatically rolling his eyes. For Taehyung, it was the last straw. Jungkook's cold indifference and detached attitude finally pushed him over the edge. Taehyung, irritated. Could you stop rolling your eyes? If something's bothering you, just say it. Say that you're uncomfortable. Jungkook raised an eyebrow in surprise. Jungkook, I know how to say no. Taehyung, snapping. Then why didn't you say it that night? Jungkook froze but quickly composed himself. Jungkook, because it was my choice. Taehyung stared at him, completely thrown off, confusion swirling in his mind. Jungkook took a step forward, closing the distance between them. His voice was low and tense. Jungkook, do you think it's easy for me? You have no idea how hard it is to be near you and feel nothing. He abruptly pulled Taehyung close, holding him tightly, as if no longer willing to restrain himself. Their lips collided in a fierce, emotion-filled kiss. Taehyung, shocked, shoved Jungkook against the wall, only to immediately lean in and respond with an equally intense, demanding kiss. The door clicked. They broke apart abruptly, turning toward the entrance. Jin stood in the doorway, his eyes wide with shock. Jin, awkwardly. Sorry. I didn't know. The door wasn't locked. He quickly closed the door and left, leaving them in stunned silence. Taehyung was the first to break it, erupting into hysterical laughter. Taehyung, the door was open this whole time. Jungkook couldn't hold back either, laughing so hard he had to lean against the wall for support. They laughed together, uncontrollably, as if it was the only way to release the flood of emotions they had kept bottled up for so long. As the laughter subsided, Jungkook exhaled heavily and looked at Taehyung with a faint smile. Jungkook, I'm not easy to deal with. I'm jealous and ridiculously possessive. The most I can tolerate is your tactile stuff with Hoseok or Jimin. That's it. Anyone else, I just can't handle it. Taehyung, laughing. I've noticed. But you know, I'm not exactly a gift either. Taehyung, more serious. I can't live without touch. It's important to me, you know? Jungkook, with a sigh but firmly. If you need more, I'm ready. Morning till night, every day. I'll hold you as much as it takes so you won't look at anyone else. Taehyung froze for a moment, staring at him, first in surprise then with a warm smile. Jungkook, a bit quieter. Shall we try? Taehyung slowly nodded, his voice steady and confident. Taehyung, let's date. Their eyes met, and suddenly everything felt simple and clear. Taehyung leaned in closer, and their lips met in a tender kiss, full of promises and hope. When they returned to the main hall, holding hands, the lively atmosphere of the party was still buzzing. Some colleagues glanced at them curiously, but most assumed it was just another of Taehyung's typical gestures, one of his many tactile habits. They approached Jimin, Hoseok and Yoongi, who, surprisingly, looked a bit nervous. Jimin, whispering anxiously, "What if he doesn't forgive us? What do we do then?" Hoseok, adjusting his jacket, "He'll forgive us. It'll be fine." But Yoongi, who had been quietly observing something behind them, suddenly tapped Jimin on the shoulder. Yoongi calmly, "Relax. They're fine." Jimin and Hoseok turned abruptly, only to see Jungkook and Taeyoung walking toward them, hand in hand. Their confident steps and light smiles were so harmonious that any lingering doubts instantly vanished. Hoseok squinted and was the first to speak. Hoseok sheepishly, "Taeyoung, how are you feeling? I hope we didn't overdo it with our little help." Taeyoung, with a faint smile, "I haven't forgiven you, but thanks anyway." Without a word, Jungkook casually wrapped his arm around Taeyoung's waist, pulling him slightly closer. Hoseok mocked indignation. "Hey, you're being really audacious, Jungkook." Jungkook calmly but with a hint of challenge, "Get used to it." Jimin burst into laughter at the scene, while Yoongi quietly sipped his drink, clearly pleased that his plan had worked. A few months later, Taeyoung burst unceremoniously into Jungkook and Yoongi's office, as if workplace etiquette was something that simply didn't apply to him. Without a word, he strode confidently to Jungkook's desk and, without hesitation, perched himself on Jungkook's lap. Wrapping an arm around Jungkook's neck, Taeyoung leaned in and kissed him on the lips several times. Each kiss left Jungkook looking flustered yet radiantly happy, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. Having completed his impromptu mission, Taeyoung stood abruptly, flashed a bright smile, and walked out of the office as though nothing unusual had happened, leaving Jungkook in a state of pure bliss. For a few seconds, Jungkook sat back in his chair, beaming and relishing the moment. Then, with a contented sigh, he straightened up, adjusted his posture, and returned to his work, the satisfied smile still lingering on his face. At his own desk, Yoongi didn't even glance their way. It seemed he had long since adapted to Taeyoung's sudden interruptions and mastered the art of ignoring them with the precision of a true professional, entirely absorbed in his tasks. 6 months later, Taeyoung and Jungkook stood in Namjoon's office as he leisurely sipped his coffee, trying to explain his position. Namjoon firmly, "I can't approve vacation time for both of my top specialists at the same time. It would create too many problems. You'll have to take turns." Completely unfazed, Taeyoung dramatically rested his head on Jungkook's shoulder. Jungkook, as if by instinct, leaned down and casually kissed him on the lips. Namjoon nearly spilled his coffee, coughing violently as he struggled to regain his composure. Namjoon, wiping the corner of his mouth, trying to steady himself. What was that just now?" Taeyoung, unbothered, looked at him with a slight smile. "Taeyoung, just a reminder that you still owe us for that urgent project Jungkook and I successfully completed." Namjoon froze, still processing what he had just witnessed. He'd heard rumors about the two of them dating but had always dismissed them as gossip, chalking it up to Taeyoung's naturally tactile nature. But what he'd just seen forced him to completely rethink that assumption. Namjoon, flustered, avoiding their gaze. "Alright, fine. I'll sign off on your joint vacation today. But no more surprises like that, understood?" Taeyoung smiled in satisfaction, while Jungkook smirked subtly, still holding Taeyoung's hand. Namjoon, trying to regain his usual demeanor, took another sip of coffee, though his hands still trembled slightly. Joint vacation. The flight attendant kept returning to Taeyoung, offering drinks and desserts, each time lingering a bit longer than necessary. Taeyoung, as always, was polite, smiling softly as he declined, but Jungkook couldn't ignore the excessive attention. Sitting beside him, Jungkook fixed the attendant with a cold stare so sharp it could have frozen the entire cabin. Yet the woman seemed oblivious, continuing to make her rounds. When Jungkook's patience finally wore thin, he leaned in close to Taeyoung. His lips brushed possessively against Taeyoung's neck, lingering just long enough to leave a kiss that made his intentions crystal clear. He straightened up and shot the flight attendant a questioning look, making it perfectly clear that Taeyoung was already taken. Her face flushed bright red with embarrassment, and she quickly retreated to the far end of the cabin. Jungkook smirked, crossing his arms over his chest. Jungkook, quietly, with a smug grin. Looks like it worked. Taeyoung chuckled, shaking his head. Taeyoung, will you ever stop being so jealous? Jungkook, maybe. When people stop staring at you like you're a work of art. Sometimes, they had to make their relationship obvious to ward off overly persistent admirers. But for Jungkook, it was always a way to affirm Taeyoung was his, and his alone. When they arrived, their villa on the water greeted them with elegant interiors and panoramic windows overlooking a breathtaking seascape. That evening, as the sky blushed with the soft hues of sunset, they opened a bottle of champagne and settled at a small table on the terrace. The endless expanse of ocean glimmered in the golden light of the setting sun. Jungkook, feeling a slight nervousness rise in his chest, took a deep breath and finally spoke. Jungkook, nervously but earnestly. I've been wanting to do this for a while. And honestly, I was a little anxious. But Taeyoung, you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it, revealing two simple but elegant rings. Taeyoung froze, momentarily stunned, before unexpectedly bursting into laughter. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an identical velvet box. Taeyoung, grinning brightly. Are you serious? I was about to do the exact same thing. They both laughed, their mirth filling the warm evening air with a sense of pure joy. Jungkook, smiling softly. Well, I guess we'll just have to wear 2 rings each, one from you, and one from me. Taeyoung, beaming. Perfect. They carefully slid the rings onto each other's fingers, their hands intertwining as the glow of the sunset bathed them in warmth. Jungkook. 2 rings, 2 promises. It suits us perfectly. Taeyoung. Absolutely. And you know, I'll remind you every day why you made the right choice. Jungkook chuckled quietly, pulling Taeyoung closer. Their kiss melted into the sound of the waves, reflecting their love, boundless and profound, like the ocean stretching endlessly before them.